I'm Kira Kazantzis. I'm the directing attorney at the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley. Together with our pro bono co-counsel, Sidley Austin, and the public interest law firm, Western Center on Law and Poverty, we proudly represent the Buena Vista Mobile Home Park Residents Association. Our presentation will include testimony by Libby Seifel, our expert, and legal analysis by senior attorney Nadia Aziz. First, I'd like to thank staff for their hard work on these proceedings, and I'd also like to thank the council and the mayor for listening so attentively and respectfully to the testimony of many of our clients, all of the residents of the mobile home park, and the community. Your decision won't and shouldn't be made in a vacuum. 400 Palo Alto residents live in Buena Vista Mobile Home Park, and its closure will mean the loss of their homes, and it will mean the loss of an important community. It also means the obliteration of a very diverse community, a vibrant community, and one that is very close-knit. And it will also mean the loss of shrinking numbers of affordable housing opportunities for low-income individuals in Palo Alto. But you don't have to rely on having your heartstrings pulled to make a decision about the relocation package, because we're going to show you step by step how grossly inadequate the relocation package is, how it doesn't adequately mitigate the adverse negative consequences that you've heard about so eloquently tonight that would result from the closure, and frankly, how the hearing officer just got it wrong. After weighing the evidence and considering the arguments, the council must reject the closure request. I'm going to introduce Libby Seifel. She's a principal at Seifel Consulting, and she's advised numerous cities, public entities, and private clients on the planning, funding, and development of mixed use and mixed income developments. She teaches and writes about best practices in relation to real estate and urban development. She's going to talk to you about what comparable housing would mean to Buena Vista Mobile Home Park residents and what it means in the ordinance.
Thank you, and you'll have 10 minutes to cycle.
Thank you very much.
First, what I'd like to say is what a wonderful community this is, and I know because I lived here for many, many years. And as my presentation will describe, what makes Palo Alto so wonderful is precisely why it will be so difficult to find comparable housing for the residents of Buena Vista that they can afford in the Bay Area based on the owner's current proposed relocation assistance. My presentation is organized into 3 parts that basically describes what comparable housing is according to Palo Alto's mobile home park conversion ordinance, the challenges that they face if they were to be displaced in the Bay Area's housing market, and why they will not be able to afford comparable housing given the relocation package. First, what is comparable housing? It needs to be within a 35-mile radius, which generally is from San Francisco to Oakland, Berkeley to Santa Cruz. It also needs to be affordable, similar in size and function, and a similar location, specifically located in a community that has similar access to shopping, medical services, recreational facilities, and transportation, and all of the other unique amenities that make Buena Vista so special. Most importantly, it offers a unique homeownership opportunity in Palo Alto for very low-income households. As Melody Cheney says, I can actually say I have a place of the American dream. Many of us in this community and elsewhere want to own a home. The schools in Palo Alto, as many of the folks that have testified have said, are superior than schools that are near most of the comparable mobile home parks that were evaluated by Professor Doherty for the analysis that was prepared for the attorneys representing the residents. And specifically, the 129 students that live in Buena Vista are served by schools that have a surrounding number of residents that are lower in their percent of Hispanic culture, percent eligible for meal programs, and percent English learners. As summed up by the Palo Alto PTA, not only do the residents benefit from the schools in Palo Alto, so don't likewise the schools benefit. from the diverse population that enriches our schools and our community. The transit options are superior to those near other mobile home parks, again, as illustrated by Professor Doherty's research. The location is adjacent to a major bus line along El Camino corridor. It's within 2 miles of the Caltrain station. And as was found, 2/3 of the Buena Vista area residents commute less than 30 minutes to work. Other mobile home parks do not have this access, which will mean it'll be much harder to get to work for these residents, and they will have to do more driving. In summary, unique attributes of Buena Vista that need to be found for comparable housing are that it provides affordable home ownership, there are premier high-achieving schools, great medical facilities, local parks and recreational facilities, access to jobs, and regional transit service, all of which make this a very unique location as illustrated on this map. And you can see with the green the wonderful parks that are nearby. If displaced, Buena Vista residents are going to face an affordable housing crisis like we haven't seen in many, many years, or maybe ever before in California. So I first wanted to start with what can residents afford. Using your recent housing element, we did calculations to analyze the typical affordable housing costs for residents, both in terms of home ownership and in terms of rental. And we looked at the income characteristics of the residents based on the relocation data that has been assembled. And typically their annual income is $35,000 a year. About 50% of them, though, earn less than $30,000 per year. The average household size for those living in the mobile homes is about 4%. And so these are the characteristics that we've used to analyze what approximately they would be able to afford to buy in the Bay Area housing market. Looking at condominiums, you can see that what the homeownership affordable housing price for residents would be is about $95,000, compared to what the current condominium price is here in Palo Alto of $1.2 million, and comparable facilities, comparable ones countywide, both in San Mateo and in Santa Clara County at around $600,000, or 6 to 12 times what they can afford to pay. Similarly, rents are $633 in terms of what is affordable, and rents are in the $3,000 to $4,000 range for 2-bedroom apartments in comparable communities. And note, mobile home park space rents at the Buena Vista Park right now are in the $700 range, so they are approximately affordable to what residents can pay for rent. But the cost of purchasing a mobile home in a comparable community in the Bay Area would be very expensive. We looked on Trulia, which is the only source that is readily available, of what the prices are for mobile home, comparable mobile homes, and you can see the ranges from $45,000 to $300,000 plus for mobile home parks, mobile homes and manufactured homes. And in addition, this is getting worse. As we can see, California's been rapidly escalating in price. That dark green on the shading there shows that this area, Palo Alto, Mountain View, Menlo Park, is the most rapidly increasing portion of the Silicon Valley market right now. And you can also see just the rapid price escalation that has gone on in Santa Clara County in recent months and years. And mobile home prices have also been experiencing dramatic increases, as indicated by Mr. Brabant in his review of the appraisal of the park owner, showing that there have been large increases, well north of 100% in just the past 2.5 years. So there are really limited options for Buena Vista residents if they are forced to relocate. Specifically, current mobile home sales prices are the current relocation assistance would be approximately $53,000, which consists of current market values of mobile homes per the appraisal, plus the rent subsidy for 1 year, plus moving expenses and startup costs. So in other words, the total package is about $53,000. compared to what we are seeing in just the adjacent communities, which would be Mountain View and Sunnyvale and Redwood City as being the closest communities with mobile home parks, of about $100,000. And according to the owner's appraisal, the space rent at other nearby parks is about $200 to $300 more per space rent, meaning it's in the $800 to $1,000 range per month. There are also relocation options would be very limited because there are few vacancies. The mobile home prices have been escalating, as I just indicated, and space rents generally exceed what is currently being paid by residents, and this is all stated in the relocation impact report as well. So in summary, the current relocation assistance is not enough to enable households to afford mobile homes near Palo Alto. And they would likely have to go beyond 35 miles to be able to find something that they could afford to purchase. And it will not be comparable because of the unique characteristics that I've just identified in terms of what makes Buena Vista such a wonderful place to live. And that would result in those that wanted to keep their jobs, very long commutes by car, or the need to find new jobs, or the challenge that they would face, which is to make additional trade-offs between paying for housing, paying for transportation, and paying for food and healthcare for their children and their family members. And there really is not affordable housing available for other choices, for example, as rents. There's an 8 to 10 year waiting list from the Housing Authority. Condominiums are prohibitively expensive, so after a year, they're really going to be facing severe challenges. As you can see by this map, the only places they could really afford apartment rents would be way outside of this location. And so last but not least, comparable housing is based on unique features of Buena Vista, which include all of the characteristics that I've identified, including schools, transit access, recreational facilities, medical facilities. If they're displaced, Buena Vista residents will face challenging difficulties in this very, very rapidly escalating Bay Area housing market. And with the owner's proposed relocation assistance, residents just will not be able to afford comparable housing at the levels of assistance that's being provided because the cost of housing will just be so expensive for them. And also, given the very low amount of vacancies, they will really not be able to likely find enough housing to really be able to relocate themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, very well timed. So now we will go to the resident's attorney, and you will have 30 minutes. Let us know when you're ready.
Okay, I will. Is someone going to wait to load our slides? It's on the desk. Thank you. So while we're waiting for the slides to load, my name is Nadia Aziz. I'm senior attorney with the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley. We represent the Buena Vista Mobile Home Park Residents Association, and the Residents Association represents the vast majority of residents who live at Buena Vista Mobile Home Park. So again, thank you for hearing this important matter that is in front of you today. Sorry. The question in front of City Council tonight is whether or not the mitigation assistance is adequate to mitigate the negative impacts of the park closure. And as our presentation will show, the answer to this is no. The Residents Association's presentation tonight will focus on 4 points. 1, that the mitigation assistance will not allow residents to move to comparable housing in a comparable community at Palo Alto. 2, because the mitigation measures are based on appraisals that have not yet occurred, it's impossible to ascertain whether the amount of relocation benefits being proposed is adequate. 3, the proposed startup costs that the park owner has to provide are inadequate because it's based on a one-bedroom rate and will not allow families to relocate to new and stable housing. And lastly, there is no plan to relocate residents to comparable housing. The relocation impact report that the park owner is proposing does not comply with Palo Alto's ordinance. Our written comments have discussed two groups of residents that we are not going to focus on tonight with our oral comments. Those are mobile home residents whose mobile homes can be moved, which the RIR predicts as about 2 residents, and also the studio tenants who the park owner is not providing any relocation assistance to. Because the vast majority of residents at Buena Vista are mobile home park owners whose mobile homes can be moved, we are going to focus on our oral comments on those particular residents. So for those residents, the park owner must pay enough relocation assistance so that those residents can move to comparable housing in a comparable community. And that means a comparable mobile home in a comparable mobile home park. The park owner is also required to reimburse residents for any loss of investment in their mobile home and reimburse residents for any remaining loan payments on their mobile home. Instead of providing comparable housing as is required by the ordinance, the park owner proposes relocation benefits based on an appraised value that is yet to be known. And that appraised value does not take into consideration the value of the park being in Palo Alto. The park owner also must provide a lump sum relocation payment to all residents, regardless of whether or not their mobile homes can be moved. This lump sum startup cost payment includes moving costs, first and last month's rent, a security deposit, a 1-year rent differential for low-income families, which includes all residents at Buena Vista, and additional assistance for disabled and senior families. As we will discuss later in our presentation, this assistance is not enough because it's based on a 1-bedroom, which for most families will be inadequate. So the ordinance contemplates comparable housing. This means enough relocation payments so that a resident at Buena Vista can purchase a mobile home or condominium in a comparable community. The ordinance specifically defines the terms comparable mobile home park, and comparable housing. In defining what comparable housing is, the ordinance requires that the park owner provide enough assistance to be able to move to a comparable community similar to Palo Alto within 35 miles. The ordinance lists the amenities that those comparable communities should have. The ordinance lists similar access to public transportation. You've heard how residents rely on public transportation, how the park is right on the 22 bus line. And this allows residents to have a diversity of job opportunities being so close to public transportation. It's similar access to shopping. Residents who live in Palo Alto have better access to fresh food, to fresh groceries than other residents who live in low-income communities. It's similar access to medical facilities. The park is a mile or so away from one of the nation's premier hospitals, which is Stanford Medical Center. It's similar access to community amenities and recreational facilities. Palo Alto is full of parks. There's summer programs that Buena Vista residents, the children at Buena Vista can attend. And even though the ordinance does not specifically say this, the list of amenities is inclusive and is meant to include schools. Comparable housing has to take into Palo Alto schools. Palo Alto is its schools. The reason that Palo Alto is such a valuable place to live, the reason people want to move here is because of its schools. Palo Alto schools are among the best in the nation, and you've heard testimony, I don't need to go through it again, about why education is important to the residents and why the schools are important to the residents at Buena Vista. They're integrally connected to the school system. Having a quality education opens doors that these children would not be able to get in other communities. And Buena Vista residents pride themselves on a 0% dropout rate. The dropout rate for Latinos in Silicon Valley is about 28%. Buena Vista prides itself on a 0% dropout rate because they know the importance of having a Palo Alto education. So these are things that must be taken into consideration when looking at what constitutes a comparable housing and a comparable community to Palo Alto. Using an appraised value for comparable housing is not an adequate measure, and it's not contemplated by the ordinance. The ordinance, when listing the type of relocation assistance that the park owner must provide, talks about replacement housing. Appraised value is not used in the definitions of comparable housing, and it's not used in defining in that list of payments that the park owner must make. This graph shows why using appraised values is not an adequate measure. The projected average updated appraised value for mobile homes in Buena Vista is $22,000. The current range of prices to purchase a mobile home in nearby communities, and this is Mountain View and Sunnyvale, is between $120,000 to $380,000. Using an appraised value is not going to allow residents to move to comparable housing, and it's not going to be adequate. What's even more problematic is the actual relocation assistance that residents will be getting is unknown at this time. During the last few minutes of the administrative hearing, the park owner proposed a last-minute change, which changed the relocation impact report to include an updated appraisal that happens after the park closure process has been completed. So you're being asked tonight to make an important decision about whether the mitigation assistance is sufficient, yet we don't have any numbers in front of us. We don't know what the relocation assistance is. It's difficult to ascertain whether or not assistance that is unknown is going to be adequate. Even more problematic is that the hearing officer provides no recourse for appealing individual residents to appealing the relocation assistance once it is known. This is the final decision that's being made about the closure process. The ordinance contemplates that the relocation assistance that residents receive are subject to a third-party review, specifically a third-party review by a hearing officer and by the city council. The owner is essentially circumventing that by not having any numbers or not having the not having the actual relocation numbers in front of you today. Based on what we do know, however, it's unlikely that the appraised values that will happen after the park closure process has been completed will be enough to allow residents to move to comparable housing. And that is because the park owner proposes to use the same methodology that was used for the appraisals that came with the relocation impact report in the appraisals that will happen after the park closure process has been completed. And there's several reasons why the appraised methodology is flawed. First and foremost, the appraisal methodology does not consider the in-place value of being in Palo Alto. So much like a single-family home, the value of a mobile home is not just the physical building. It's not just the four walls, the roof, the ceiling, and the fixtures that are in the home. But it also needs to take into consideration the location of that mobile home. Just as a single-family home in Palo Alto will be worth a lot more than the exact same single-family home in Modesto, a mobile home in Palo Alto needs to take into consideration the value of it being in Palo Alto. The fact that the children who live in that mobile home can attend world-class schools. The fact that it's close to public transportation. The fact that the mobile home is close to Stanford and is close to amenities that other communities don't have. The appraisal methodology ignores the fact that the park is in Palo Alto. The rebuttal report that the park owner submitted specifically states that it is ignoring the in-place value of Palo Alto. And I quote, "The Palo Alto location of the subject mobile home park, due to the park's limited infrastructure, facilities, and high density, simply negated the need for a location adjustment." First of all, the condition of the park does not outweigh the incredible value of the park being in Palo Alto. You've heard that from the testimony of so many residents about the fact that they moved here because the park is in Palo Alto. Second, it's not fair to disregard the value of the park being in Palo Alto because the park owner did not upgrade the park. It's essentially allowing him to take advantage for failing to maintain the park. Second, the appraisal methodology views low comparables to assess value. How you look at value in appraising a mobile home is looking at comparable sales. The comparable sales that were used looked at older models and looked ahead, and there was a skewed, some of the sales that the appraisal methodology looked at were outdated. And for that reason alone, it skewed the values of the mobile homes at Buena Vista lower than they should have been. The bottom line is using an appraised value is not going to allow residents to move to comparable housing, and it's not going to be enough relocation assistance. The lump sum startup cost that the park owner is required to pay will not be sufficient for families at Buena Vista. More than 2/3 of the people living in Buena Vista have children under 18. Most of them have more than 2 children living with them. For all but 4 of these families, the relocation assistance or the lump sum startup cost, including the rent differential, will be based on a 1-bedroom. Not only will this be insufficient for families, but it does not comply with the ordinance. When talking about the rent differential, the ordinance specifically states the rent differential is based on rent in the new location. Families with children are not going to be able to rent 1-bedrooms. Which landlord is going to rent a unit to a 1-bedroom unit to a family of 5? A family of 5 trying to rent a 1-bedroom will be overcrowded, and most landlords will not accept such families. Additionally, most landlords require that a tenant make 3 times the rent in order to be able to rent. Having a rent differential based on a 1-bedroom ignores this reality of renting in the Silicon Valley. And even presuming that this will be enough to allow families to move, because the rent differential is limited to 1 year, it's only going to allow for residents to move to temporary housing. Most importantly, there's no plan here. The relocation impact report and the ordinance are not just about giving relocation payments to the residents, but it's about creating a relocation impact plan that's going to help residents transition to comparable housing. It's looking at the individual needs of specific families at Buena Vista and coming up with a plan that will move them to comparable housing. The ordinance contemplates such a plan. The park owner is required to survey residents, and in surveying residents, they had to look at what is the household income of residents, what is the family size, is anyone in the family disabled and have specific needs. And not only was the park owner required to look at the specific needs of individual families, but they were required to look at the comparable community and what comparable housing needs. The relocation impact report required an analysis of the purchase price of comparable mobile homes. Where those comparable mobile homes and condominiums are located. Are they within 35 miles? Are they within comparable communities? And for each specific park, the park owner was required to look at space rent and qualifications for each resident. This information is not so there's just a list of housing available somewhere that can be posted for residents to move to. And it's not made in a vacuum. It's made so that there can be a plan to move residents to comparable housing. There is not one single location identified within 35 miles of the park that residents can move to with the relocation assistance that's being offered. There is no plan here. In fact, one of the expert witnesses of the park owner specifically said In my experience, sometimes homeowners opt to relocate to the Central Valley where living costs are lower. You saw in Ms. Seifel's presentation the radius of 35 miles. It doesn't include the Central Valley. There is no plan to move residents to comfortable housing. So what is this going to mean for families? So I want to talk to you specifically about what the relocation assistance will mean for one family. Dolores Cavarubias is a hardworking mom. She's lived at Buena Vista for 14 years and owns the mobile home that she lives in. Dolores moved to Buena Vista for several reasons. One, that so she could be close to her work. She works in the food service industry and her job is in walking distance. And most importantly, so her daughters can have access to a Palo Alto education. Her oldest daughter is in college at UC Santa Cruz. Her younger daughter one of her daughters has a learning disability and requires special education. Because she lives in Palo Alto, she was able to access an individual educational plan and get supportive services so that she graduated through the Palo Alto school system and is now at Foothill Hill College trying to be a veterinary assistant. Her youngest daughter goes to Barron Park Elementary. Her mother also lives with her and helps her care for her daughter. So this family of 5 has specific needs. Ideally, they would like to stay close to their work, close to the schools. They need a space big enough for their family, so as we stated earlier, most likely a 2 to 3 bedroom unit. And they prefer to stay in a mobile home. So what is being proposed tonight? The proposed average relocation assistance is $53,000. However, this $53,000 doesn't come with a plan. And it's likely that Dolores will get much less than this $53,000 because her mobile home was appraised for less than the average. What options does this relocation assistance give Dolores and her family? So as Ms. Seifel's presentation showed, it's very unlikely that she'll be able to move to a mobile home in which she's within 35 miles. Even if she could find a mobile home, she would probably need to finance some of it. If the park owner provides no information about what financing options might be available for low-income residents. Would the choice that she faced be being required to move 100 miles away to the Central Valley in order to have a home ownership opportunity? Or does her option mean that she must rent in order to stay close to the schools and to her job? The relocation impact plan doesn't answer these questions. As you all know, there's no mobile home. Buena Vista is the last mobile home park left in Palo Alto. What the relocation impact plan needs is information and analysis that would help specific families have an individualized plan to allow them to move to comparable housing. If you ask the park owner about their plans, their response probably will be, that's why we have a relocation specialist. Now, the relocation specialist is limited to relocation assistance that's been provided. He cannot create affordable housing and affordable home ownership opportunities that simply do not exist. During the hearing, the park owner's relocation specialist specifically testified that it would be difficult to find housing within 35 miles of the park. He also stated that residents would need $20,000 to $50,000 more than what was being offered to buy a mobile home. He also mentioned that residents would probably need some kind of outside financing, but didn't talk about what options would be available to low-income residents like the vast majority of Buena Vista residents. He also stated that it would be unlikely to find an apartment with similar rents. Relying on the relocation specialist is misguided. It advocates the park owner's responsibility to have a plan, and it does not make sense given the relocation assistance that's being provided. The relocation specialist can only work with the assistance that's being provided, and as you've seen, residents are going to need a lot more to move to comparable housing. before City Council tonight is whether or not the relocation assistance is enough to adequately mitigate the negative impacts of the park closure. And again, the answer is no to this question. One, it will not allow residents to move to comparable housing. It's based on an unknown value, as it's based on appraisals that will happen after the closure process is over. The startup costs are limited to a one-bedroom, which would be insufficient for most families. And lastly, there's no plan to relocate residents. Because the proposed mitigation aspects are inadequate, and because the ordinance has not been complied with, the city must reject the current plan. When this ordinance was passed 2,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. It would be a biblical ordinance. When this ordinance was passed in 2000, was it meant to give the residents some money so they can move to the Central Valley? Or did it anticipate providing enough assistance so that residents could move to comparable housing and comparable community? Thank you again for hearing us tonight. Both Ms. Seifel and I are available to answer questions if any council members have questions at this time.